Hi everyone, how y'all doing? As you can see, I might have got the lighting situation fixed a bit better. Got another light to help out. Won't see quite as many bad shadows as there were in previous videos. Kind of happy about that. Hope this works out. So before I begin, I just want to let you know that I haven't posted a lot of videos lately because I've started another channel. The World Cup is coming to Qatar this year, so I figured I'd, just do a bunch of videos where I discuss Qatar, information about the metro, things like that to help people who might be searching about Qatar to find information for when they come down later this year for the World Cup. So the channel is called Heading to Qatar 2022. I'm going to keep posting videos on there for the next while. And, because of that, I might be posting on this channel not as frequently as I might have before. So anyway, a little while ago, I went on a trip to Greece. I have been to Greece before, but only to a few of the islands. I had never been to the mainland. So I was actually pretty stoked to take a trip to Athens to see the ruins and, the museums and all the various sites. And in that respect, it did not disappoint. The Acropolis, the famous hill where the Parthenon and a number of other ruins are, is really nice. And it has a prominent place in Athens, sort of right in the heart of the city. It was, I think, the heart of the ancient city of Athens back in the 5th century BC. Yeah, 4th to 5th century BC was sort of the peak time. And a lot of the buildings are still there. It is ruins, of course, but Athens has done a pretty good job with the whole neighborhood. The neighborhood around the Acropolis is also really nicely done. It's chock full of restaurants and shops and hotels, and it was pretty crowded. A lot of people just roaming around enjoying the neighborhood. And in the evenings, it seemed to be the place to go for a lot of Athenians. There was always lots of people in the evening roaming around the neighborhoods beneath the Acropolis. So, of course, I went up to the Acropolis. I mean, duh, that's why you're there, right? It was crowded, and, it's a bit of a hike to get up. You don't have, elevators and things. You've got to hike up the hill. But, you can just take it in stages. There's plenty of things to see on the way up, whether it's amphitheaters or graveyards or whatever. And then finally you get up to the top of the Acropolis, where you can see all the various temples and statues and whatever other ruins, happen to be around. There were a lot of things built up there. I think a lot of it had been completed by about the 5th century BC. And of course, it has stunning views of the city. So not only do you get to see very nice ruins, but the views are also really good. Now, the buildings are in a state of ruin. They are not pristine. They're doing a lot of restoration work right now to try to make them nice. But one of the things that would kind of surprise you at first, and you only kind of figure it out once you start reading the signage and so forth, is that many of the statues and carvings up there are copies. They're not the originals. Because over time with the pollution and so forth, it was starting to degrade the artifacts a bit. So the Greek government made a conscious decision to remove the originals and replace them with copies. Now, that doesn't mean you can't see the originals. Just at the base of the Acropolis is a brand new museum called the Acropolis Museum, and that's where they put all the originals. And they did something really cool with it too. They made sure that it was proportioned very similar to the Parthenon. So when they put a lot of the carvings and things that would normally be found on top of the Parthenon, they put them exactly where they would be. And you go around this area that is the size of the Parthenon, so you can see how they would have actually looked back then. And you get a better view of it because, of course, you're standing on the floor pretty much level with them as opposed to standing on the ground looking up, 25 meters or whatever to sort of vaguely see some carvings up there. Now, not all the carvings are there because about half of them are in the British Museum in London. And the story with that is that about a couple hundred years ago, a British lord by the name of Lord Elgin had gone to Athens and made a deal with the Ottoman authorities who controlled Athens at the time to be allowed to remove a lot of the sculptures and stuff from the ruins of the Acropolis and ship it back to Britain, which he did. And those are now in the British Museum. Oh, and when you read the signs and stuff in the Acropolis Museum, the shade they throw about this. You see, the Greek government wants all the artifacts back that Lord Elgin took, but the Brits aren't giving them up. The Brits are like, nope, not giving them up. In fact, one of the criticisms the Brits had was that in the British Museum, they were kept in a much better state than having been left at the Acropolis, where, you know, time and weather and pollution sort of wore them down. So that was one of the reasons why the Acropolis Museum was built, so that the Greek government could show that, yes, it can preserve these things, and it has now built a custom-built building for these artifacts, and could you give them back, please? Of which the Brits went, no. So you can go to the British Museum and see the other half of the Parthenon. They're called the Elgin Marbles in Britain. And in the Acropolis Museum, they don't hold back. Shade is thrown. Plundered, it is stolen. Lord Elgin is, I don't know, he's a thief, whatever. Like, they do not look at what happened 200 years ago kindly. I think the crux of the argument was the Ottomans were occupiers, so we shouldn't have even made the deal with them in the first place. And he damaged a lot of it, taking it off the Acropolis and shipping it to Britain. And, well, it's time to give them back. Like, why is the British Museum holding half the Parthenon sculptures and things? So, yeah, if you go to the British Museum, they, of course, have a very different view of this, and do not consider Lord Elgin to be some sort of plunderer or vandal. But the Elgin Marbles still remain in the British Museum, and it doesn't look like anytime soon Britain's going to be giving them back. Now, there are, of course, a number of other sculptures, and we also went to the National Archaeological Museum to see a lot more artwork from the ancient Greek period. Now, it was actually kind of interesting going through the museum. There was stuff from much earlier than what we consider the peak classical period, around, 500 BC, 400 BC. There was stuff much earlier, stuff from other Greek islands, different art styles. But the style that you really consider ancient Greek art seemed to really come about around the 5th century BC, 4th century BC. That seemed to be the peak of, their artistic culture, which then carried on through to the Roman period, because the Romans really looked up at Greek art and had imitated it to some extent. Now, when it comes to Greek sculpture, a lot of things that people note about Greek sculpture, there seems to be a lot of nudity with it. And having gone to the museum and sort of read about it, what was interesting was it was a stylistic choice by the ancient Greeks. Most Greek sculptures come in two forms, whether you're sculpting a man or whether you're sculpting a woman. And for the sculptor to show off his skill, men were typically depicted nude. That way he could show off his ability to sculpt the body and show the muscles. Now, this wouldn't have been too controversial in ancient Greece, because a lot of things like athletics were done in the nude back then. So I bet you, the modern Olympics did that now, all the athletes had to compete nude. I think viewership would really go through the roof. But, in ancient times, the Olympics and other athletics were done in the nude. Whereas for ladies, they would be depicted clothed, for the sculptor to be able to demonstrate his skill showing flowing fabric and the contours of fabric. And so whenever you went through the museum and saw the sculptures, with a couple of exceptions that I'll get to in a sec, men were depicted nude and women were depicted in flowing robes. The exceptions to this rule were statues of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, who were occasionally depicted nude, and grave markers. Now, I couldn't believe seeing all sorts of statues of, people seated, greeting other people, and so forth, until I started reading that these were all sort of like mausoleum sculptures. When a person died, the family would commission this sculpture to be placed in the family crypt or grave or on top of their grave. I'm not quite sure how they would use them. But these things were huge and very detailed. Now, in those cases, everyone was depicted with clothes on. You didn't have the deceased person shown nude, at a gravestone, which was generally the exception to the rule of men being depicted nude. And these gravestones really seem to show family life. There was one where the gentleman was clearly a soldier, and so forth. And I really actually liked those sculptures, a bit more so sometimes than what we would call, the classical nude sculptures and stuff, because these seem to be, just more, you could relate to them more, because they depicted real people sort of just, greeting people, or people kind of mourning the passing of this person. Now, if you do go to the Acropolis Museum, I will just mention that there is a very nice restaurant on the roof with a view of the Acropolis. It had been recommended to us to actually eat at the restaurant. And yeah, it was a bit pricey, but the food was really good. And of course, you have a killer view. So if you do go to the Acropolis Museum, you might want to bring a bit extra money so that you can go up to the restaurant there. One of the other things that was really neat about the Acropolis Museum is that below it is an ancient Greek city. I believe this is a small neighborhood of the original Athenian city from about the 4th, 5th century BC that archaeologists dug up, and then they decided to build the museum over top of it. So like the museum's literally on stilts above this ruin, and you can go down to visit the ruin underneath the museum. So it was kind of neat having this museum above this ruined city, and the museum having all the statues and stuff from the Acropolis, while below were, the walls and the flooring and stuff of the ancient Athenian city. Now, one thing to warn you about with Athens is that while the neighborhood very close to the Acropolis was quite nice, once you get a bit away from that, the central part of Athens gets a little sketchy. It's not in great shape. There's graffiti and stuff everywhere. Homeless people, so forth. Our hotel was pretty close to the Acropolis, but it was maybe about 3 or 4 metro stations away, which, I thought was close enough, and be about like a 20-minute walk to start to get to the Acropolis neighborhood. But we didn't realize, just sort of how much the central part of the city really slides once you move away from the Acropolis. Now, I was fine, because it was just, a couple of guys, because I was there with a cavalry buddy of mine. I was roaming around, and, it's not like anyone really bothered us or anything. But if you were there with your family, you might be a bit like, oh, what's with this neighborhood? So I won't go out and say that it was, extremely dangerous, but it certainly didn't look very good. Now, Athens has had a rough time of the last decade. The financial crisis really impacted Greece. They had real issues with the economy. The IMF had to step in. There was all sorts of restrictions put in place. It was a really tough few years for the Greek economy, and I'm not sure if they have truly recovered. And then COVID hit, which totally took out the tourist industry for a good year and a half. So can't blame them that Athens really doesn't have the money to just beautify everything. And so, maybe things fell apart a bit. Once you get out of the central part of the city, it generally gets nice and it's fine. And there's nice neighborhoods up in the hills. And in the south, there's, nice neighborhoods near the shore and things like that. But in the downtown core, it can get a bit rough. So you do need to really make sure where your hotel is, and maybe have an idea of what the neighborhood around the hotel looks like. One other thing about Athens, which we discovered when I met up with a Greek colleague of mine who toured us around outside of Athens for a day, was that I think it was 1 or 2 years ago, there were a number of devastating wildfires that struck Greece, and huge wildfires that destroyed a lot of homes. I think a number of people died, and surprisingly, and I didn't realize this, those fires had gotten very close to Athens. And so just outside of Athens are these large areas of burnt out trees and destroyed buildings. And it was just so weird just driving along, and suddenly it's like, boom, you're just like, everything was just kind of all black with dead trees and stuff everywhere. And you're like, dang, like this is only a few kilometers outside the city. And it apparently was a real concern, and a lot of buildings had been destroyed in those wildfires. Now the fires didn't like reach like full suburban neighborhoods and take out, thousands of homes. But my friend had said, like, he and his family had been evacuated from their home because the fires were approaching, and many outlying suburbs in Athens were in real danger of going up in flames. So that was a bit surprising. I knew there had been devastating wildfires in Greece 1 or 2 summers ago, but I didn't realize they had gotten that close to the city. But at least, they managed to fight the fires off, and the city was generally safe. Now, what turned out to be some of the best things my friend and I did was to rent a car and go out to other places on the Greek mainland. We were planning, we'll just stay in Athens the whole time, but 6 to 7 days in Athens is maybe a bit long. It doesn't take you that long to see, all the sights in the city. So between the Acropolis and the Agora and the National Museum and other sites, you're probably looking at 3 to 4 days, to comfortably see everything. So we decided to rent a car and go to some areas outside of Greece. Now, my friend wanted to buy high quality olive oil. And, we weren't sure, okay, what's good olive oil and so forth. And then we looked on a map and we saw that a few hours drive outside of Athens is the city of Kalamata, which we immediately went, oh, yes, we've heard of this variety of olive, Kalamata olives. Oh, there must be great olive oil in Kalamata. So got in the car, drove to Kalamata along actually some really nice highways. There are toll highways throughout Greece. And like every few kilometers, well, not every few kilometers, like every, 10 to 25 kilometers, you got to stop and pay a toll. Toll was typically €2 to €3, but the highway was in good shape, and it was pretty easy to get around Greece using these highways. So we got to Kalamata, roamed around a bit, went to an olive oil shop. They had a huge selection of olive oil. They only sold a few. But the lady explained that her husband was a professional olive oil taster. So he had olive oils in the back from who knows where, but he had dozens and dozens of olive oils. So we got some good quality olive oil there. Quickly went down to see the beach at Kalamata. It's a beach city. And then we decided to take a trip over the mountains to... Now, in case you don't know what that is...
This is Sparta!
Yeah, it's Sparta. Sparta happened to be about, 40 to 50 kilometers away, and there was a highway over the mountains to get there, so we were like, oh yeah, Sparta, let's go check out Sparta. Because, of course, thanks to the film 300, everyone knows Sparta. It turned out to be one of the best things we did, taking that road over the mountains as opposed to the very nice toll highways. It was beautiful. You had beautiful views, there were villages in the hillsides, there were nice cafes along the road, there was random goats roaming around sometimes, but it was a really scenic trip and we really enjoyed it. It took us probably about an hour and a half to get those 50 kilometers to Sparta, although, there were stops here and there. Well, actually it took a bit longer because we stopped in a cafe for lunch, had a great time. Got to Sparta, went to the Olive Oil Museum there, went to the shop across the street to, again, buy some olive oils, check out the statues and stuff. There wasn't a lot in Sparta. There wasn't, like, tons of ruins and things to see. It wasn't Athens. But it was a beautiful trip, and we were glad that we did it. And then that evening, drove back to Athens. Took us, I think, around 2.5 hours. So it was a pretty full day. I mean, I think we did about 6 to 7 hours of driving, but it was definitely worth it. It was great to kind of tour that area and see the mountains. Now, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, you will know about the oracle at Delphi, a famous oracle that would, foretell the future in cryptic ways. And many gods and heroes would go to the oracle at Delphi to have their fortune told, or to, get some kind of direction as to what action to take because of some crisis. And it's famous in Greek mythology. So we decided to head up to Delphi because there are ruins there that have been uncovered by archaeologists. The first thing that surprised me was that Delphi is not that close to Athens. It is around 2.5 hour drive to get to Delphi. So when these heroes were going from like Athens or wherever they were going to visit the oracle, that was not an easy journey. That would have taken many days. And Delphi is like halfway up a mountain. So again, it was a very scenic trip. Beautiful highways hugging the mountains. And then you come to a couple of towns, which again are just right up against the hillside before you reach Delphi. It's very scenic. And then we got to Delphi, explored around. It's very hilly. Delphi is built on the side of a mountain. So, you do a lot of climbing to see most of it. It got pretty tiring, actually. And then after seeing the ruins, there is a museum right at Delphi where a lot of the statues and other artifacts are kept to protect them from, pollution and climate and erosion and so forth. And it's a great museum, definitely worth seeing. Definitely worth hanging out in the nearby towns, if only to have lunch and explore around. They are very picturesque and have fantastic views of the valley. Finally, there was, of course, the food. Everywhere we went for lunch and dinner, we tried to order Greek food. With some limitations, my friend being Qatari is Muslim, so that meant pork was off the menu, as was anything that might have alcohol in it. And that was fine. By and large, the food was always really good. I will give a shout out to one particular restaurant that we found south of Athens when we were touring around the beach area down there. And this was a Cretan restaurant, as in they served cuisine from the island of Crete, which we also really enjoyed. And I don't recall ever really being disappointed with any of the food that we had. Greek food is wonderful, and I highly advise eating it whenever you get the opportunity. So that's it for my trip to Greece. I really enjoyed my time there. I was so glad that I went. I'm hoping maybe one day to go back to Greece to maybe see a couple more places on the mainland, or to explore a few more of the Greek islands. If you do get a chance to go to Greece, seeing Athens will not disappoint you, but I will still give a shout out to the island of Santorini, which is stunning and definitely worth visiting. So that's it for now. Hope you all have a lovely day.